Hi, this is going to be a review of the Motif character engine. This is a set of guidelines and tables to emulate player characters and non-player characters. That is, if you want to play a game as a solo game master with emulated player characters, or maybe you are playing with your group and you want to figure out the decisions of different non-player characters that the party encounters along the way, this document is great for that. And I am going to tell you how to use this one with Abraham's method, my method to run any module as a solo game master. This is going to be somewhat of a quick review, perhaps. This document is not very long, it's only 31 pages long, and there aren't any illustrations and such. Okay, let's get started. First, the quality of the document. The document, despite being quite small, it's completely bookmarked and hyperlinked, so it's going to be very easy for you to make your way through the entire document. The design is quite minimalistic. It's mostly text. Like I said, no illustrations, just a few very minor embellishments here and there. So the quality is good, everything is well explained and written and organized. As I understand it, this is somewhat of a living document, but I took a quick look at the other products by the publisher, and they are constantly saying that this document is a work in progress, but sometimes it seems like they do not update those documents as much, but I don't think this is a negative thing. I mean that this document looks pretty complete in my opinion. So maybe they just make that announcement or put that information to let you know that maybe sometimes they will add more things to it. Well, the quality in general, like I said, it's good. Now let's move on to the contents. The document starts with an introduction to what this is. This is basically a set of tools to emulate player characters and non-player characters. This could be used, like I said, in solo sessions or co-op sessions. That is, when you are playing without a game master and you want to figure out the decisions, the actions of different non-player characters that you encounter. But they also give you some ideas here that, for example, maybe you are running a game for someone who is not very experienced in role-playing games, and that person is not very confident when it comes to controlling perhaps 3 or 4 player characters. You could create an entire party, but the game master or the player could make the decisions of those AI powered or artificial intelligence controlled characters by making a roll on the different tables to see their decisions, their actions and such. So the introduction is all about that. But this document also contains information how to emulate players. That is, not only player characters, but also the players behind the fictional personas. In my case, I won't be using this too much because I like to give priority to the fictional personalities of the party members. Like when, for example, when I'm running a session for my players, or when I am participating in a role-playing game with others, I prefer to just to think that I am actually adventuring alongside that dwarf or that alien or that undead knight. I am not too interested in interacting with Joe or Bob or whoever is at the table behind that, like I said, fictional persona or character. So maybe some people won't like this section too much unless you find it exciting to represent the decisions of those players. Because I think that's too much into metagaming. You start to think about the preferences and the tendencies of the player controlling the player character instead of the player character itself. But still they give you some base character templates that decides the motives, the attitudes, the methods of either the player characters or the players. So when it comes to player characters, you have to think about that psychological aspect of the fictional character. That is the motives, the attitudes, and the methods of that character, the actions that character takes, the conflicts that character gets into, anything special or unusual about the character, the goals, the schemes, and the flaws. And when it comes to players, it's more about the style of the player, the attitude, anything default of that player, how that player engages with the adventure, how that player gets along with other players. So if you want to represent a sort of, yes, like the way that Bob or Billy or whoever is playing at the table, you have like an artificial intelligence template for that here. It's not too complex because it still plays out within the results that are determined by a set of tables later on. So you have information here on how to emulate players or player characters, the differences, the main points that you have to take into consideration when you have generated those results with the tables. And they also give you the character engine flow. This is very interesting. They tell you to keep in mind certain considerations to come up with your own interpretation of the results of the different tables. For example, first you need to consider the obvious. What is the logical or obvious outcome of something? So let's say the party of adventurers are moving along or inside this dungeon, this tunnel, and there is a door. Just to the side in the wall, there is this door with a sigil or some sort of rune or symbol that in that setting represents death. So maybe you want to decide what the fighter is going to do. The obvious, what is quite common for that fighter to do, if that fighter's personality is all about just kicking in the doors and going inside the room and killing everyone or everything and taking their stuff, it's quite obvious that character is probably going to enter the door. But this is still affected or changed or influenced by the results of the tables. Then we have the understood. This is all about a direction that comes to your mind, and the oracles will help you make the decision about what the character is going to do. But the understood has to do with an open interpretation of the goals at hand. So maybe the fighter is looking for a prisoner. So it's understood that every door must be checked in case that prisoner is being kept there, behind the door. Then we have the invented. In this case, you use the genre, the story goals, and game experiences as guides. What would the characters do next in the kind of story you are telling? How do characters typically behave in the genre or style you are exploring? In a somewhat fatalistic setting, or somewhat, maybe it's quite grimdark, it makes sense that the fighter is going to defy death by opening that door marked with the symbol of death. And then we have the questioned. After going through all of that, the obvious, the understood, and the invented, questions may still remain. That is when the oracles, the results from the tables, come into play. You use them to fill in the gaps left open by the process. So if there are still any doubts or things are not very clear when it comes to the points considered beforehand, that is the obvious, the understood, and the invented, the question is all about that, letting the oracles decide the course of action almost completely. And like I said, this is sort of like a last resource. So the flow is quite basic. I actually I printed the tables. That's the only thing that you will need. Once you understand the guidelines, you only need the tables. So you can print these tables and create this sort of like a pamphlet to make those rolls and carry out those decisions. And just as guidelines, I wrote logic, context, intuition, and question, just to remind me of that flow of the obvious and all of that. Now we have the information on character engine oracles. Let me read this paragraph to you. It says, an oracle style system is used as a random generator and to help guide character behaviors. It is a mix and match, plug and play system using a selection of flavors. Each flavor is a factor or dimension that provides you the answers. It determines the character's actions. So you choose 3 flavors for your role. You order them from first to third, giving priority obviously to the first one, and then the second and the third. Then you roll 3 standard 6-sided dice. You read them from left to right, applying each of the rolls to one of these flavors, and then you make your interpretation according to the results. So back to the fighter. Let's say that you need to create this sort of template to figure out the actions of the fighter. So the fighter is moving through the corridor. He encounters this door marked with the symbol of death. Maybe you think, well, that fighter, let's see if I can find it here. I'm going to use the standard question set, which is coming up with an answer that is using the answers table, the yes or no basically, the motivation table, and the directness table. So first I ask, is the fighter going to open that door? Maybe I make a roll and I come up with the result of uncertain or mixed answer leaning towards no. So this is the first interpretation. The fighter is probably not going to open that door. But then we make a roll on the motivation table, and maybe we obtain the result of higher engaged and motivated, maybe even obsessed. So it turns out that fighter became a bit obsessed with that door, with the sigil or symbol of death. Maybe he's just like really curious or obsessed on knowing what is behind that door, but he's still uncertain, or he's leaning towards not opening the door. And then we make a roll on the directness oracle. We make use of this table, and maybe we obtain the result of an over-the-top, recklessly direct and single-minded approach. So my interpretation would be, because you have 2 results that lean towards opening that door, that is the obsession and this over-the-top reckless approach, I would decide that the fighter at first looks at the door and he's like, I don't know if I should open that, but he's just there's too much curiosity on his side. So when it comes to this is related to his obsession, like he just wants to know what's behind that door. Now I apply the over-the-top, recklessly direct and single-minded approach. He breaks down the door, perhaps he kicks the door or destroys it with his weapon, his battle axe or whatever, and he ended up opening the door. But there could be many variations. Maybe in the answers oracle, I obtained the yes positive agreement, that is, he's going to open the door. But when I made the roll on the motivation oracle, there was unmotivated or resistant, maybe even hostile to the door. So he's kind of like, yes, I'm going to open that door, but I don't like what is going to happen when I open it. Probably there's going to be something pretty bad, perhaps. And in the other table, you obtain the Ruth Goldberg response, unnecessarily roundabout and indirect. So this means that the fighter is obviously going to open the door, but he is not very motivated. He's resistant to doing so. So he's going to do it quite indirectly because of the Ruth Goldberg result. Maybe he's going to try to open the door from a distance. Maybe he has some sort of explosive potion or artifact and he's going to destroy the door from afar. But like I said, it's all up to you. If you obtain some sort of result like that said something like pretty average response, he wouldn't open the door at all, in my opinion, because well, in case you rolled no on the answers oracle. So it's all about making sense of those combinations. You have different sets of elements or answers. You have the yes or no answer, the motivation oracle, the directness oracle, the curiosity oracle, impulsiveness, aggression, troublemaker, cooperation, tactical, and they give you different sets of flavors for your characters. It could be a standard question, like I said, but maybe it's related to a trap. Is that character going to interact with some sort of strange statue at the center of the room? Maybe you make your roll on the danger question set. This is composed of the answer oracle, the aggression oracle, and the tactical oracle. But maybe it's something completely unrelated to a specific action or task. Maybe you just want to see what a particular character is going to do in the initial part or halfway through the adventure. You have the Agent of Chaos set, which is composed of the Curiosity Oracle, the Impulsiveness Oracle, and the Troublemaker Oracle. And this plays out perfectly with the next section because, well, at the end of this document, you have guidelines to handle factions, groups of characters. They tell you all about them, how to handle them as a single entity, as if the entire faction or group was a player character. So maybe you are running a game featuring the Roaring Twenties and it's a conflict featuring gangs or mobsters. Maybe you want to see what this particular gang is going to do, or these mobsters are going to, how they are going to engage with the setting or the world. You make a roll on the Agent of Chaos set under Curiosity, Impulsiveness, the Troublemaker Oracle, and based on the results, maybe they want to attack one of their rivals. For example, let's say that, let me check my table, Curiosity, maybe you make a roll and you obtain the result of active curiosity or mild obsession. Will pursue at most opportunities. So they definitely want to attack a rival gang, or like I said, another group, another faction. You make a roll on the Impulsiveness Oracle and you obtain generally cautious but not to the point of hindering reactions. So they are going to carry out this quite subtly or stealthily. Maybe they want to enter one of the rival factions' warehouses and they're going to sabotage something. And then we make the roll on the Troublemaker table and we obtain the result of looking for that button that will set off a huge chain reaction or response. Maybe not only they are going to enter the warehouse, they are also going to steal some of perhaps moonshine or some drugs, and they are going to plant some of it nearby the hideout of another faction so that they pit both factions against each other by blaming this faction of stealing the whatever, the drugs, the moonshine, whatever, from the other faction. So that's a great way to make those interpretations. You also have a section featuring character creation. This is about making roles to decide the members of a party or a group. Maybe it's a fantasy setting, you make your role and maybe the next party member is a warrior or perhaps a thief or a champion type of character. Maybe you are playing in a superhero setting or a science fiction setting, and the next character is going to be a hero or a techie or a comic relief. Because I like to create the characters for any solo or co-op session, I don't think I will be using these tables too much, but you do have a way of determining backgrounds, the approaches of the characters, that is coming up with the personality. I think I like half of this section of the document. I don't like determining the next character role, or that is the tank, the healer, or etc., or the skill monkey, or however you want to call the character. But I do like the way that you can randomly generate the background, the purpose, the drive of the character, the approaches. So maybe the character comes from the lower middle class, but that character comes from a traumatic childhood, has that sort of background, and he lives in an average city. When it comes to purpose, maybe that character is seeking fame, or has a sense of duty, or has some sort of mutual goal with some other character. When it comes to approaches, maybe that character is going for optimized build. When it comes to skills and powers, maybe he's focused completely on looking cool. Or that character could be focused, or rather the player, the fictional player creating that character, puts the needs of the group first. Or perhaps that person, that artificial person, is just thinking about what feels most interesting or in character appropriate. So you have those tables for that. I think those tables, they're going to be somewhat mixed when it comes to reception. Some of you may like to generate characters like that. Some others, like myself, will only take a few results from those tables. After that, you have information on how to create characters with a higher level of experience or starting out with a number of experience points. This is great if a character in the party dies. That way you can somewhat randomize the experience points and the new level of the new character. And like I said, you have this section detailing groups, the factions, the name of the group, the scale of the group, how it interacts with the subcultures and communities of the setting, how much influence that group carries, the assets of that group, the ideals, the methods, the projects, the allies and enemies of the group, the membership, how to get into that group, the status within the group. I think this could be quite useful in certain settings, like for example, if you're playing perhaps in Ravnica of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and you want to know something about the guilds, you could combine some of the results of these tables with the tables within that book. So overall, what do I think of the Motif character engine? And I will tell you how to use it with Abraham's method in a few moments. I think this is actually a good document, but I don't think you will be using all of it in your solo or co-op sessions, or even in your normal role-playing game session when you play with your group. It's all about picking or choosing what you want to use in a particular situation. The thing that I like the most is the set of tables to determine the actions of the characters. And this could be somewhat of a weakness in role-playing games in the style of Dungeons and Dragons. There are many complex puzzles and riddles and mysteries. So when it comes to coming up with the decisions on how a character interacts with some sort of mechanism or artifact, or within a temple or something, a puzzle, the main difficulty is that you're going to be asking several questions to come up with what the character is going to do. But, and this is how I combine it with Abraham's method, if you use the Game Master's Apprentice deck, if you don't know what Abraham's method is, please check out the playlist, the links in the description. It's basically a set of just like guidelines on how to use the Game Master's Apprentice deck to come up with the decisions of the emulated player characters or non-player characters. So when it comes to complex situations, maybe you are entering one of those mega dungeons with all sorts of traps and deadly puzzles and all of that, I would roll on the set of tables of the Motif character engine, but I will also either draw from the Game Master's Apprentice deck or roll for the cards as indicated in Abraham's method to add a bit more granularity or more options, because sometimes you get those closed results, or even though they are still open to interpretation, some of the answers of the oracles in the Motif character engine may not be too specific, but because of the many random elements contained in each card of the Game Master's Apprentice deck, you could combine both sets of results to come up with a satisfactory solution or course of action for that emulated character. I think that the Motif character engine works best in event-driven scenarios or adventures, or perhaps those that feature a lot of social interaction as well, although I would use the Flex AI guidebook to add more detail and more depth, more realism, if you will, to the characters' actions, reactions, and responses. But I highly recommend that you get the Motif character engine. And like I said, once you read through the 31 pages, although they are less, the content is a bit... there are some pages that are the table of contents and some advertisements. Well, more like legal information. You have like 28 pages or so. Once you read through all of those pages, you only need to print out in a single page, the tables, and you're set, you're good to go. You will know how to determine the actions for factions, emulated player characters, or non-player characters in a normal RPG session. Well, thank you for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you. Please check out the links in the description. I am going to put a bunch of solo related stuff there. So once again, thank you and see you later.